Hello to everybody else. My voice is a little bit raspy. I'm having some throat problems. But here we are, reverse redacting the headlines, whatever that means. Jared.
whatever that means.
You were kind of under the weather too, huh?
Yeah, I haven't felt well for a few days. I didn't go to work Monday, and so I thought, like, all right, I'll just take a day off. I took a couple of sick days back in maybe January or February, and so I thought, well, I'll just take a day, and then I went in yesterday and felt better yesterday, and then got up this morning and felt pretty bad. So I just took another day. So I feel all right now. I feel better now, but I don't know. It's just weird. It's like something I just haven't completely kicked for a few days.
Is it like a throat thing like mine, or
it's I don't know. It's weird, everything. It's just like energy and a little bit of sneezing, but not that much. Stomach, upset stomach. I don't know. Yeah, just kind of like the full spectrum of stuff, but none of it's really like terrible. It's not like the flu or like a mild case of the flu or anything like that. So I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's just getting old. I told somebody the other day, like, if I was a professional athlete, this would be the year where I would be thinking about retirement because my body's breaking down. But I don't really do anything that physical in my line of work. So that's a pretty bad sign.
I think it'd be funny if we applied sports terminology, sports approach to regular life, and we're just like, we go to our boss and like, I just don't feel like I have another year in me. Body's really breaking down.
Right.
Go ahead and retire.
Right. At that 37, 38, whatever. Sure. Right. Yep. Yeah, it doesn't quite work like that out in the non-athlete world, where you can make all your money by your mid-30s or so, or in some cases, you get guys that, the average NFL career is like 3 years. So a lot of those guys, have to earn their money quick and save it and go on their way and find a new career. So
yeah. Okay, well, speaking of new careers, I'm not very good with transition. But in the news today, there's a lot going on in the news today. Politically, I think there's a lot going on in our world, in our country. You're the headline that caught your attention?
Yeah, this one is, I guess I can't remember if it's a day or so old, because he's kind of always in the news and it always kind of runs together. But Alex Jones, everyone's favorite conspiracy theorist / performance artist, got banned from Facebook, Apple, Spotify. I think there was YouTube. He got banned from YouTube too. He's still on Twitter. He's still on Google Plus, which I was not aware that Google Plus was still around, but apparently he's cranking out videos on Google Plus. It's going to be like him and 12 other people on Google Plus. So I guess, of course, the bigger issue that this brings up, that people who hate Alex Jones, even people who hate Alex Jones, some are not really defending him, but defending his right to be on those platforms. For me, I'm 100% fine with them kicking him off. People can talk about it being a free speech issue, but it's not really a free speech issue. Alex Jones can still say whatever he wants, but these companies don't necessarily have to give him a platform to do that. And we've talked about this in other podcasts and reverse redactions, where the internet has really kind of changed the game in terms of when it comes to people's beliefs, and especially conspiracy theories. Because years ago, of course, these people who believed in like hardcore conspiracy theories have always been around, but they had a harder time finding one another because usually they were more isolated. And so there might be one person within a community or whatever who believed that, but they had to more or less either keep it to themselves or probably be ostracized by the community to a certain extent. And so now we see things like the rise of the flat earther movement and things like that, and all of Alex Jones conspiracy theories. And the main thing with Alex Jones is the Sandy Hook thing, where promoting the conspiracy that the Sandy Hook shooting was staged. That I mean, there's all kinds of variations of it out there, but some go to the point of saying, just no one died. The kids weren't actually, real people. Other versions of it say, well, it did happen, but they staged, a lot of it
up more,
right?
than it really was, or something.
Right, and so these poor parents. Actually, I actually know a guy who went to that school. He's a few years younger than us, so he went to the school, like in the 80s, 90s or whatever. But there was one family. The families are now suing Alex Jones, and one family said that they've had to move 7 times because of death threats and harassment. So, I mean, it's a pretty unbelievable situation that, you go through pretty much the worst thing imaginable of having your child brutally murdered. And then you become a target of, basically of a sociopath with a big microphone who can profit off of people who are looking for conspiracy theories. So it's just like the nightmare never ends for these people.
Yeah, I tend to agree with your sentiment, because that thing he was touting is pretty awful. However, I think you're giving him a bigger microphone when on the internet there's no better way to amplify a message than trying to squash it.
I think to a certain extent you're right, but I almost think with Alex Jones, he is someone who is probably going to pretty much already has whatever audience he is going to have. I just don't know. I 99% of the time I would probably agree with that sentiment, but I think in cases like him, he's pretty much probably going to have the vast majority of the audience that he's going to have. I don't think you're going to have people who weren't already on board with him suddenly like, oh, well, they blocked his message, it must be real. Let's
so then why ban him?
I think it's just, I don't know if I'm sure, like, how these things go with companies, like once one does it, the others will do it as like as basically like good public relations or whatever. But I think you do it just because if I was Mark Zuckerberg or owned Facebook or whatever, I would do it out of my conscience. I don't know why they did it. But I'm sure it's probably some more closely related to the bottom line or something like that. But I wouldn't be able to stand for that, I don't think.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a slippery slope. I think this guy is he's an idiot, but I believe that once we start, banning people for being idiots, and it's different. I really do believe it's different. I know, and I'm fully for the sentiment and position that Facebook, Google, these are all private companies, but it sometimes feels like people are, using both sides of the argument, saying like,
sure,
it's become a public utility. And so I think there is a little gray area. That argument tends to, gives me pause when people say, that Facebook has become more than just a company vying in the market of communication devices.
Mm-hmm.
More than that.
Sure.
And I think it's more than just, somebody who owns a company saying, "Yeah, this guy needs to go. He's making my company look bad." I still, of course, defend his right to Zuckerberg or whoever to do that, the shareholders, to do that. But I'm glad that people are there. I'm glad that there is some outcry. If there wasn't, it would, it would be a little scary. Not because I like Jones, but because there needs to be outcry anytime someone is silenced,
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I guess a lot of it comes down to, again, a lot of people will say it's a free speech issue, and then a lot of this will go back to like people, I guess, who would identify themselves as constitutionalists or whatever, and when you get into certain issues about free speech or Second Amendment rights or whatever, I mean, I'm definitely not a strict constitutionalist. I'm more of the opinion that there are so many things that we deal with now that have grown into things that the people who founded the country could have never foreseen potential consequences of. So I tend to be more on the side of being willing to adapt to certain things. But a lot of that just goes back to what your opinion is on that. And if someone is more of like a strict constitutionalist, then they're not going to change their opinion on that. So,
well, I mean, strict constitutionalists still believe in amendments.
Yeah, but for there, I would just guess. I mean, based on everything that I've heard from, the free speech and the Second Amendment arguments, there are certain ones that people treat like they're untouchable. So, sure, in a theoretical sense, they do. But I mean, once you get on hot button issues like this, it's like, yeah, these are just kind of untouchable. There should be no rules whatsoever. So,
well, that's why we have the process of amending the Constitution, right?
Sure. Again, but I mean, the argument never really. This isn't something that's going to be, an issue that's going to go to amending the Constitution. It's just like you said, a gray area where people are going to argue over it, and they're going to refer back to these arguments, but it's never actually going to go there. So
yeah. Well, we'll see. How it progresses. I think I'm interested to see, how it progresses as far as who's banned next.
Yeah,
because I don't believe that Alex Jones is the worst of the worst.
He's the worst one that I know of, and I guess maybe it's kind of one of those things where I don't want to know about who's worse until I have to be confronted with it. I mean, I'm sure if Alex Jones ever fades away, he'll be replaced with someone else. I will say there are, I can think of worse ones who just have lower profiles. So there are definitely worse ones out there that I can think of off the top of my head, but they just don't have the kind of level of audience that he does.
Well, we've allotted enough time to Alex Jones. Let's move on. So the other news is not, I'm afraid, isn't much more happy for me. The news around here, of course, is the 66 shot and 12 fatally, 12 killed in Chicago over the weekend. And it seems like just a rash of shootings breaking out, and most of them, of course, gang related. But it being here in Chicago and seeing it on national news I think it's interesting, you know.
Mhm.
I can't help but think, is this, part of me goes into some conspiracy theory. I'm just wondering, like with the mayoral election coming up, you know, is this coincidental? I mean, it could be. It just got warmer here, and when it gets warmer, people
Cri-
are out,
Crime
people
goes
are in their
up. Yeah.
houses. I
Mhm.
think it happens everywhere where it gets warmer, where there's a lot of violence. Violence gets worse.
It absolutely, just crime period, goes up in the warmer months of the year because, like you said, people are out more. Um, well, a lot of it, yeah, just goes back to that. So, yeah.
Well, warmth in all aspects of science stimulates activity,
Right.
and it's interesting. But so yeah, so the electrons have been firing, and unfortunately, there are 12 dead because of it. Some kids,
Yeah.
and and recently, so I have. It's interesting to see the discussions on Facebook. There's some there within the African American community. There is some tension, because there are those. It's a difficult and messy relationship with the police,
Right.
because the response from our government was from Rahm Emanuel was to order up, like somewhat like 600 more cops or something like that.
Hmm.
And so are more cops in the community really what we want, But by the same token, how do we stop this,
Right.
and the communities are, the African American community is sort of struggling with that too. It's like, how do we sell? Because one of the big things coming out of this is that even though there were 66 shootings, there has been no suspects.
Really, zero arrests out of 66 shootings.
Yeah, and no, and the conspicuousness, conspicuous fact is that nobody is talking.
Yeah. Well,
And
I mean, but I think that's kind of, isn't that typically pretty common for low income communities, because these are people
it's
who
dangerous,
yeah, it's dangerous for them. Yeah, they can't move out of that community.
right?
And if they talk and tell the police who was involved with this, eventually, I mean, I've seen countless cases of people, in those communities being then killed,
Yeah,
or but so I don't know.
but so then there's the dilemma.
Hmm.
Are more cops in the community? It's just frustrating and sort of ironic, like we've had so much problem with police brutality, and yet we need more police, you
Yeah.
know. And I guess that, to me, that's ironic, because I don't see, like, I guess people would say, yeah, we need more good police, and I just don't believe in good police. Not to say that I'm anti-police, but when you have, when you try to quell problems with power, I have a fundamental belief, philosophy, that trying to suppress violence with power, with a gun, is just not the answer.
Hmm. Yeah. Gosh, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know what to say on that issue, because it's, I have a completely different perspective on it, because like both of my parents were in law enforcement, and so I kind of grew up around law enforcement, and I've seen both types. I've seen really good law enforcement officers, and I've seen a fair number of them who seemed like they wanted a badge and a gun to compensate for something.
Mhm.
So I've seen it both ways, but I mean, for me, as a white guy in a mostly white area, when I see the cops, I don't, I'll if I'm driving down the road, I'll automatically like look to see how fast I'm going. But apart from that, there's no, there's no sense of fear from me. Whereas, I think if you're, if you're especially like a young black guy, it's going to be a different response for very understandable reasons. So for me, if I was near a situation like that was having the kind of problems that Chicago's having, because of my background and my perspective, I would, have no problem with being like, oh yeah, let's just load up on cops. But I'm not the demographic or the person that's typically in that type of situation. So I don't really know what the answer is.
But I mean, even as with that perspective, you can understand the dangers of being more of like having an iron hand, right?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want it to be a police state,
Right?
Sure. So that's a pretty murky line of where it goes from being a sufficient amount to adequately keep people safe to excessive force. I mean, again, to me, just the presence of them wouldn't necessarily be an issue. If suddenly like the percentage of people getting stopped or arrested spiked up in a typically like peaceful community, then suddenly you would have to go, hey, what's going on here? But yeah, with something like what's going on in Chicago, how do you solve that problem without, I guess, being more active in terms of stopping people and things like that? So
yeah, and on the side of police helping, Giuliani cleaned up New York with more police.
yeah, well, and I mean, it's kind of like, it's not the same thing, but in terms of, the military surge in Iraq for all the problems that we had there, that seemed to work to a certain extent to at least make things better. So obviously it's not a apples to apples comparison, but I think when you've got violence, I don't know any other way to do it other than to have a surge of force that really works. I mean, it that works in the short term, at least. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do to improve communities and living conditions long term, but if you're just trying to stop 60 plus people from being shot over a weekend, I don't know how you do that without a sudden surge in force.
Yeah, I agree. Well, those are the two headlines that stuck out to us today. Did you have any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. That's all I got for today.
Well, as always, I appreciate your perspective, Jared, and I hope that we can see. I'd like to see some more funny headlines. Actually, I wondered. I thought I had something, but I couldn't find it.
Maybe that's
if you can look for if we could each
Yeah.
look for one funny one to go along with our serious
to be slightly less depressing. Yeah, right.
All right, man. Well, have a great day.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Talk to you later. Guess I got to restart here.